Books, books. I like books. I'm gonna read them all. Hi readers, Chris here. Welcome to my channel where I review fantasy, Stephen King, all sorts of books, and today I'm going to be talking about The Winter of the Witch by Katherine Arden. This is the third and final book in her Winternight Trilogy. This trilogy started with The Bear and the Nightingale, continued with The Girl in the Tower, and then it finishes with The Winter of the Witch. Now, it was hard for me to decide whether this was my favorite book in this series because I liked it that much, or it could be recency bias because it is the one that I read most recently, but I think that this is my favorite book of the whole series, and I'm going to tell you why. So if you don't know anything about this series, it's about a young girl named Vasilia, and she lives kind of in this small village in the Russian wilderness. Her father is like kind of a well-known person in their village. She has a number of brothers and sisters, and in the beginning of the series, this village has a rich history of kind of believing in all of these fairy tales and folklore. All the mythology in this book is based off of real Russian Slavic mythology. So this means that there are a ton of magical creatures that kind of live in the village and in the household. So for example, there is one creature that like lives in the stove. There's a creature that lives in the stables with the horses. There's all these various creatures. There's creatures in the woods. There's creatures that are winter creatures. But what is starting to happen, and what kind of happens throughout this series, is that there is a new religion that is starting to gain popularity. And as this new religion gains popularity and the priests kind of impose their religion on the people of not only the village, but the people of Russia in general, all of these fairy tale creatures are kind of starting to lose their power. I kind of think of it like Tinkerbell and Peter Pan. Like, she only exists if you believe. So a lot of these creatures only exist if they believe. So Vasilia, being a young girl, she kind of has this ability to see all these creatures, not only see them, but she can interact with them. So basically, up until this point in the series, she's really the one that's kind of keeping them alive and keeping them going because everyone else is starting to follow this new religion. And poor Vasilia is the only one who's trying to keep the old ways alive. And of course, because she's doing something different than a lot of people are doing, this really makes her an outsider. People think that she is a witch. People think that, because she is a woman, she should either be married, someone's wife, or be in a convent. But Vasilia has this wild nature to her. Like, she does not want those things. She wants a different life for herself. And that's one of the main struggles throughout this series. The other main struggle in this series is that the Prince of Russia, the Prince of Moscow, in this time period that this is taking place, it's taking place like very much in the past. So Russia is also under threat of invasion from a group that they call the Tartars. So basically this group of warriors, they kind of want to come in and invade. And so this prince is kind of trying to balance, potentially trying to not start a war with these people, but also defend Russia at the same time. So that's a very, very, very basic setup. At this point in the story, this third point in the story, something very big happened at the end of the previous book. Something very big happened where Moscow was attacked by this kind of, I don't want to say evil, but let's say this maleficent force, this otherworldly force that Vasilia had to kind of help defeat. But she didn't really defeat him. I don't know how to explain it without going into spoilers, but let's just say there was a big battle that happened in the last book, and even though Vasilia did help save a bunch of people, she also revealed herself to be, kind of this wild woman, and now the people of the church are really trying to put her to death because they think that, you know, her having this ability that she has makes her, you know, a servant of the devil, which of course that is not the case at all, but it's hard to explain that to the general public who don't see the same things that Basilia sees. So in the beginning of this book, Basilia is really on her own. She's been sentenced to death, even though she saved a bunch of people. And the Winter King, who is kind of one of the leaders of all of these fairy tale creatures, something happened to him in the previous book, and Basilia kind of thought of him as an ally, and she no longer has him either. So Basilia is left with a very difficult task. A, she has to save herself. B, she has to find the Winter King so that she can save all of her, you know, fairy tale creatures. And then 3, she needs to save all of Russia as well. So let's talk a little bit about the world of the Winternight Trilogy, the world of Winter of the Witch. This is an amazing world. If you are a fan of fantasy at all, you will love this series. The world building is just amazing. I love that it's based off of real mythology. Like, you can go and Google all these different types of creatures, and these are creatures that people actually believed in. So I think that's really, really cool. And this whole concept of, you know, this Winter King who kind of lives in this parallel world where it's always winter, and there's just so much cool stuff in here, so much cool stuff. There's magical horses, and there's magical creatures in the water. There's the King of Winter. There's a bear. Like, there is so much cool stuff. A firebird. So much cool stuff. If you are into fantasy at all and into the world building of fantasy worlds and all that kind of stuff, I mean, this is going to be right up your alley. And now I want to spend some time talking about Basilia herself, because I think she is such an amazing heroine, and I think she presents a unique heroine that you don't always see in fantasy stories. And here's why. In the beginning of the series, because she is so young, because she is such a young girl, she is very naive about the ways of the world. Like, because she's only lived in this small village where she's been surrounded by all these magical creatures, she really doesn't understand that the world that she's living in won't accept her. Like, she doesn't understand that women don't have the same rights as men. She doesn't understand why people want her to marry, why people want to send her off to a convent, and she doesn't understand sometimes the way that things work in the world. And because of this naivete, it sometimes leads her to not make the best choices. Specifically in book 2, she makes a choice that is kind of terrible. Like, you understand why she does it, and she doesn't make any choices because she's bad. It's just she's so naive sometimes. She makes these choices and you kind of want to yell at her like, oh my God, why are you doing that? But I feel like that by the time you get to book 3, she is still a bit naive here, but you really see her growth, not just as a character, but like as a person. And I feel like that makes her so relatable. Like, she really goes through a journey in this series, and she really goes through a lot of growth, because she starts out like so naive, and she really has to grow up into a woman, and we get to see that in the series. I feel like a lot of time in fantasy, especially with female characters, they are presented either as these like super special heroines or like these spunky go-getters, and that's not Basilia at all. She's not a spunky go-getter. It's just that she finds herself in these situations and she deals with them the best that she can. So I think that makes her super relatable, super easy to like, you know, cheer for, and a super great character. Besides Basilia herself, there are so many wonderful characters in this book. I'll just name a couple of my favorites here, but Basilia has an older sister named Olga. And in book 1, Olga was kind of sent off to marry a prince because that's what women are supposed to do. You either go and marry and become a wife, or you go to the convent. So now Olga finds herself in this role where she is a wife and a mother, and she has certain responsibilities. So her life is very different from Vasilia, very, very different. And I love that these two sisters, because of their different lives, it is a source of conflict sometimes between them because they don't understand each other. Olga doesn't understand why Vasilia can't just be a normal girl and go and get married, and Vasilia can't understand why Olga is just a wife and she doesn't want something more. So there's a lot of conflict between them throughout the series, but even with that conflict, like at the end of the day, they are still sisters and they do still love each other, and I do think that makes for a beautiful story arc for them. Vasilia also has a brother, Alexei, and he actually, again, in the first book, he ended up joining the church. So he is a monk. Not only is he a monk, but he's also a very close friend with the Prince of Moscow. So when all this stuff happens in Moscow and there's all this turmoil, Vasilia kind of really leans on her brother as an ally, because even though he is very much, believes in the church and believes in his religion and believes in certain things, again, Vasilia is his sister and he loves her and he wants her to succeed. So a lot of times, he is actually the one that kind of helps her plead her case at different times to the high priest, and he's just a wonderful character. Again, super kind, super brave, super, super, super great. So besides just the heroes in this story, there's also a few villains who I think are really fascinating, and the most fascinating one is this man, Father Constantine. Father Constantine in book 1 was sent to Vasilia's village to basically convert the village to his religion. And he is one of these, he's a religious fanatic. He is a religious fanatic. And what that means is that, in his heart of hearts, he truly believes that he is doing the right thing. So when he meets Vasilia and sees this young lady who's wild and he knows there's something otherworldly about her, something different, he sees her otherworldliness as something wrong. So he believes that it is his mission from God to change her, to convert her, to get her to fit into the mold that he thinks that she should fit into. And on the surface, it sounds a priest doing that to a young girl, that's terrible. But you do get a lot of his point of view throughout the series and even in this final book. And you do kind of feel bad for him at times, because he is so passionate about his convictions, but he's so misguided, but he doesn't realize how misguided he is. So I think that really makes him a deep, complex, and nuanced villain. A lot of villains, they're mustache twirling, they're evil, blah, 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 blah. And yes, at the end of the day, he is a villain and he does some truly horrendous things, but he's really more than that. And I think because this story takes so much time to develop him as a character, you really do understand where he's coming from most of the time. And I think that makes him a fascinating villain. Now, I did before mention the Winter King, who is kind of the king of all the fairy tale creatures, but he also has a brother, the bear, and his brother is kind of the opposite of him. So where the Winter King is the sun in the daytime and warmth and light, the bear is darkness and cold. And they're not, because they're these fairy tale creatures, even though they kind of present themselves as being one is good and one is bad, it is so much more nuanced than that, so much more nuanced than that. And this book in particular, you really get to see that in this one, because up until this point in the story, you have the Winter King is the good guy and the bear is the bad guy. But that kind of changes in this book, and I think that choice was super fascinating and super fun to read. So with the super great world building and the deep and complex characters weren't enough, the plot of this last book is just fantastic. It's just amazing. In the second book, I did think the plot was a little bit slow in the beginning. I never felt that this one was slow at all. From the very first page till the end, this plot is constantly moving along. There's never really a slow part in this plot, which makes it super fun and engaging to read. And again, because I mentioned earlier in the video, there's kind of like two different conflicts going on. There's like the conflict of the magical world that's going on, and then there's the conflict of the real world that's going on. The beginning of this book really focuses on the conflict of the magical world. And when that gets resolved about 2/3 through the book, I had totally forgotten that there was like this whole other plot in the real world that was going on. I honestly was like, I feel like this is the end of the book. Why is there so much story left? And I was like, oh yeah, there's this whole other plot that's going on. So that was really, really, really fun. And reading this book, not once, but twice, reading this book actually got me emotional. I was so invested in the story, so invested in the characters, that something happened that really made me sad, and it made me tear up. And then towards the end of the book, something really good happens, like something really happy happens. And that, I think, made me cry even more. Like, I cried more at the happy moment than I did at the sad moment. And let's just say that all of these magical creatures like are so wonderful and so amazing. And there's one in particular, Vasilia has a magical horse that she got in the previous book, and that sticks with her. There is something that happens with this horse, both bad and then good, that literally had me bawling. If you know anything about me, you'll know that I am an animal lover. So when it comes to animals, be they mythical creatures or not, that type of thing like really affects me, really gets me in the feels. So if you are an animal lover, this book will probably make you cry, or it'll at least get you in the feels. It'll get you in the feels like it did me. So I really don't think I can say anything else about this book. Amazing world building, fantastic characters, and a super great and fun plot. This book has cemented that the Winternight Trilogy is probably now one of my favorite adult fantasies of all time. I absolutely love this series. I want to get other people to read it so I can talk about it with them. I don't know why more people don't talk about this series, because it's just great. It's fantastic. So if you have not read it yet, The Bear and the Nightingale is the first one. Do yourself a favor. If you like fantasy at all, give this one a try. So that's my review for Winter of the Witch, the third book in the Winternight Trilogy. So now I want to know from you, have you read any books in this series? Have you gotten to Winter of the Witch yet? Did you love it as much as me? Did you not? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel for more bookish stuff coming your way soon. All right, everyone, happy reading.